Hi, everybody. It's a little past 11, so we're going to get started. We just ask if you have any questions during the presentation, if you could put them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them as soon as possible. If we don't get to your question, we'll answer it after the presentation because we carved up some time for that. That said, I'm going to kick it off to Jonathan, and he's going to start.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, I'm Jonathan Butkus, Director of Managed Services here at Verity IT. Working with the help desk over the years, I can't even begin to tell you how many people have called in with a cyber emergency. From email hacks to credit card fraud, the amount of emergencies we've come to experience are endless. That's why we include dark web monitoring and security awareness training in every single one of our managed service plans. Security is best implemented in layers, not for redundancy, but for thoroughness. It's common for some of the various layers to include cloud security, email filtering, network firewalls, endpoint antivirus, and other technical controls. However, the user layer of protection is far too often overlooked and consequently the most vulnerable. Modern cyber criminals achieve the greatest results by attacking users directly via social engineering and other scams. That's why we include dark web monitoring and security awareness training with all of our managed service plans. These essential services empower users to make smarter decisions while using technology, and it helps them to become a highly effective component in preventing cybercrime. Overall, this will improve your business's security posture and help prevent catastrophic cyber events. That leads us into today's webinar. We hope some of you leave today with a better understanding of what goes on in the darker part of the web and the knowledge of how to help protect yourselves. With that said, I'm going to hand it off to Kim, our partner over at Dark Web ID. She's a cybersecurity specialist, and we're excited she is here to present. Take it away, Kim.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I'm so glad to see so many attendees on the webinar this afternoon. Very excited to talk to you today about cybersecurity and some of the threats posed to your organization by the dark web. We really are hoping you find this conversation helpful, timely, and relevant, and that you're able to take away some insights and tips to help keep your organization safe. Look, we've all seen stories about data breaches, right? It seems like anytime you turn on the news or scan the headlines, there's always a story about the latest company that got breached, how it affected millions of users and included all kinds of personal data that's now out on the dark web. In fact, these headlines have become so prevalent, so normalized, I'm afraid we've become somewhat immune and don't really think about what this information can mean and the damage it can cause. We've become detached from the stories and the threats and the potential impacts, or we don't know what to do about it, so we do nothing. But I really think we're at a point where we need to confront it head on by answering some important questions. Things like, what does it mean when our data or our organization's data or our employees' data is on the dark web? How does that data get on the dark web and why does it matter? Oh, and by the way, what does the dark web even look like, right? So during our time together, what we'd really like to do is open a conversation around these questions. We'd like to focus on the current landscape of cybersecurity as it's impacting small and medium-sized businesses and organizations. We'd also like to see if we can take away some of that mystique of the dark web and maybe pull back the curtain a bit and walk you through some screenshots of the dark web where cyber criminals are buying and selling stolen data, as well as some of the methods that they're using to steal that data. But to start out, we'd like to give you an idea of how these breaches are happening, which ties into this idea that it's often our employees that are our greatest threat to a company's security. So here's what I mean by that. Here is an overview of the different ways that breaches occur. It may be no surprise that the top offender is phishing scams, which have come a really long way in sophistication. The second most prevalent way that breaches in is through compromised or stolen credentials, but we may not be able to tell exactly how they were obtained. And then we see some other methods here. Ransomware attacks use malicious software or malware, also listed here, that's designed to prevent access to a computer or to data until a ransom is paid. Ransomware is typically spread through phishing emails or by visiting an infected website. Other breaches are a result of hacking or through brute force attacks, which is a trial and error method where an attacker systematically tests possible passwords until they get a hit. Although we see several different ways that breaches can happen, what we'd really like to emphasize here is that the majority involve credentials being stolen. This is important for us to acknowledge, and we have to think about the impact those stolen credentials can have on an organization, because a single compromised credential could result in a breach, stolen data, ransomware attack. It all points back to those stolen credentials, whether through a phishing attack, a brute force attack, employees clicking on an email they shouldn't, or downloading an attachment that has malware. All of that starts at the human level. So as we look at this breakdown of how breaches happen, we need to acknowledge that it's skewed towards human error. I think this is an essential for us to understand so that we can empower our employees to become more aware, more vigilant, and understand the impact of what stolen credentials can mean. And we have to help them understand that it's not as simple as changing a single password on a single site, but it's about that pattern. It's about having internal policies in place, but it's also about training team members to play a vital role in your company's overall security. So let's talk about that overall security through the lens of what's referred to as the zero trust framework. This concept of zero trust is the acknowledgement and belief that everyone has been compromised, that if we ran a scan on the dark web for all of the attendees on this webinar, for instance, every person on here would likely have something pop up. Maybe the severity of the exposed data would vary, but zero trust is this idea that we should operate under the assumption that we've all been compromised. Because once we've accepted that, we can shift our focus to access management, making sure that the right people have the right secure access and are working from the right machines at the right privileges. And at the same time, we're also monitoring for those compromised credentials and external threats. This framework lets us manage that individual access to make sure that we don't have team members accessing the network when and where they shouldn't, or logging into machines that they shouldn't have access to, or having privileges to sensitive data and applications that are beyond what's needed for their particular jobs. Establishing this cybersecurity framework really allows us to identify and address any gaps. But beyond that, zero trust allows us to work towards alignment with compliance laws, which dictate how we approach security and access management. Because here's the thing, compliance and privacy are no longer optional. We're seeing compliance regulations make their way around the world, and they're everywhere now. It started with the GDPR in Europe, which was the first entry into making compliance mandatory, and now it's here in every state. California and New York listed here, set the bar high here in the States by requiring even small businesses to have insights into what their employees are doing and on reporting breaches. So cybersecurity is no longer this, nice to have. It's mandatory, and it's something that businesses are required to do. So we've been talking about exposed credentials and what it can mean to a company, but I wanted to take a moment and talk about how employee credentials can lead to a breach. Here's a really great visual that I think helps us understand how real and broad the risk can be. We're looking at 9 key functional areas of a business, from HR and payroll to email, purchasing, banking, finance, and so on. As you look through here, I'd like you to think about all of those places where your employees are going to perform their day-to-day job functions. All of the places where they're creating accounts, they're using their work email addresses and creating a password. We can be really great at addressing threats on the network, but we can't ignore all of these third-party sites where employees are creating logins. We have to think about those external threats, and in doing so, we have to talk about that human behavior piece and ask ourselves some hard questions. Are we confident that employees are creating unique, hard-to-crack passwords for every single site they're using? Can we be sure they're not recycling passwords, or just as worse, adding that token character or two at the end and thinking they're all good? Because this is where that data on the dark web can come back to hurt your company or organization. When these accounts are connected by emails and passwords, when users are using the same or a variation of the same login credentials on multiple sites. So let's say, for example, I use Expedia to book my business travel, and Expedia experiences a breach, and I'm using that same password on Office Depot, where I have an account with a corporate card on file to make purchases. not good, right? Or what if I'm using that password somewhere on the network? Once someone has a password to gain entry into your organization's network, they have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And you can see how the potential for damage dramatically increases just from a single compromised username and password. As a quick example, I was talking to an IT provider last week who told me about a client of theirs who had just gone through something like this. The client had an employee who received an email that appeared to have been sent by DocuSign, something that they used regularly for contracts and agreements and such. The employee clicked the link in the email, entered his email and password, and using those same credentials he entered, the cyber criminal was able to access his account and send an email to their bank instructing them to wire $50,000 to an offshore account. The bank didn't call to verify that request and wired the money, $50,000 right into the hands of the cyber criminal. They had to get the FBI and the Treasury involved. It was a really long, drawn-out affair. In this case, the organization did get their money back, thank goodness, since the bank didn't follow procedure, but that was after a whole lot of time and resources were spent. You can see, in this example, lots of others like it, how just a single exposed email and password can have this domino effect that leads to lost revenue, downtime, damaged reputation, just a lot of potential for disaster when those bad guys get their hands on employee data. So we know that there's this thriving marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen credentials on the dark web, but we may not have a clear picture of exactly what the dark web looks like, how it operates, how cyber criminals are able to conduct their business. So I thought it'd be helpful to share some actual snapshots that our analysts grabbed so that we can kind of get a good look at the dark web. So, the dark web refers to that part of the internet that's intentionally hidden and that's inaccessible through standard browsers and methods. But surprisingly, it actually operates very similar to what you and I experience when we're exploring and working on the internet. For example, there are job postings just like this one. As you can see, the dark overlord is hiring, and he pays quite well. For just 10 years of experience and some innovative thinking, a cyber criminal can make a whopping $762,000 to start, increasing to over $1 million after just 2 years. What I find so interesting is that there's a probationary period, there are performance reviews, just like legitimate companies might put in place. Here's a snapshot from the dark web. A criminal organization is offering up credit cards to buyers. Probably a little bit tough to read on the screen, but it's an advertisement for the full package, actual physical credit cards, complete with pins, spending limits that this seller will ship to buyers discreetly via FedEx, so your neighbors won't even know what you're up to. Or how about this one? It is a big election year, but not even our voter registration is safe. Check out this product offering that includes the personal data for, in this case, 1.8 million Kansas voters, including names, addresses, dates of birth, and more. But it's not just in Kansas. Here's the same offer for lots of other states. Notice these prices, more than $10,000 for this data. And these are just the ones that we were able to fit on the screen. And finally, lots of us are using Zoom to meet and collaborate while we're working from home. We're even using it now for this webinar. As a result of the coronavirus pandemic, lots of people have turned to Zoom to connect. In fact, Zoom went from 10 million daily meeting participants in December to 300 million daily meeting participants in April. With that crazy increase in usage also came concerns around Zoom security practices. One particular area of concern is that new Zoom bombing phenomenon you might have heard of, where uninvited attendees troll Zoom meetings with the sole intent of disrupting the meeting, often doing some pretty disturbing and troubling things. Well, hackers got a hold of a bunch of compromised Zoom accounts and posted them on the dark web so that bad actors can get everything they need to bomb those meetings. In mid-April, a cybersecurity intelligence firm found more than 500,000 Zoom accounts for sale on the dark web, with accounts being sold for less than a penny each, so quite a bargain there. I wanted to touch on some emerging methods that we're seeing cyber criminals use to execute attacks. One of the things that I think is a bit surprising is how sophisticated and turnkey some of these methodologies are, such as this one, this idea of ransomware as a service that borrows from the software as a service or SaaS framework. For a subscription costing just a few $100 a month, cyber criminals can get a really nice branded platform to log into, like the one we're looking at here. And they can add in all of the contacts that they want to launch an attack against, all of the people that they'll send the ransomware to. There are even pre-made templates ready to go. They can just sit back and monitor the attack through their dashboard, track who's opened, who's clicked the link, who's paid the ransom. This whole ransomware as a service is a really easy way to operationalize ransomware attacks for deployment on a large scale, and it allows even the novice cyber criminal to launch attacks without too much difficulty. Taking ransomware attacks just a step further, we've seen this trend where ransomware attacks escalate into extortion. It goes a little something like this. The general consensus has been that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, don't pay the ransom because it's likely that you're not going to get your data back anyway. There's just no guarantee that paying off cyber criminals will get your data back. But now cyber criminals are saying, hey, fine, if you don't pay the ransomware, I'm going to release your data on the dark web to make some money, destroy your business and its reputation. It's just another example of how cyber criminals are getting smarter and, again, more sophisticated in the way they're executing these attacks. And as we think about the ways that they can get their hooks into your business and cause all kinds of damage and chaos, I think it's also important to think about what would happen if your business suffered an attack like this, and whether you've got that business continuity plan in place to make sure that if disaster does strike, you're able to minimize downtime and the effects to your organization. And finally, I wanted to touch on phishing scams, since they are one of the easiest and yet most effective ways that bad actors can steal employee data. Phishing kits are available for purchase on the dark web, and they make it super easy for cyber criminals, even those with minimal technical skills, to launch phishing campaigns using these pre-made phishing templates and step-by-step instructions. And if they don't have a list of targets, not to worry, that can also be purchased on the dark web as well. As part of those phishing kits, legitimate websites are cloned and that login page is changed to a credential stealing site. Here's a side-by-side example of the actual Facebook landing page and the landing page included in the phishing kit. It's nearly impossible to tell the difference, and you can see, I think, just how effective it is. Most users, probably myself included, would be hard-pressed to tell the difference here. We continue to see, this year-over-year increase in phishing scams, but it's only picked up even more during the COVID pandemic, as noted here by the FBI, who warned businesses of that growing threat. The pandemic is this dream come true for criminals who rely on that deception and need to create a sense of urgency to achieve success with phishing campaigns. So the past several months really have presented a huge opportunity to snag victims. During a crisis, we're more on edge, we're seeking out information and direction and guidance, and it really is this perfect time to capitalize on the uncertainty, the rapid changes, and that overall disruption that makes us even more susceptible for phishing emails. Because we're so hungry for information, we're accessing information in different ways and at different times. They know we're less likely to take that time to really examine a message and make the decisions on whether to open and click. So, not surprisingly, we have seen that surge in COVID-related phishing scams, and lots of them. Here's an example that plays on that need to stay up to date on the latest news and development. It appears to come from the CDC and includes a link to a list of new cases in the area. We've pointed out some of the telltale signs that can help a user identify this as a scam: that fake email address, the generic greeting, the poor grammar. But these messages are really timely and relevant, and for the distracted, emotional, and information-hungry user, quite effective as well. But why limit to those phishing scams to just email, right? Cyber criminals have realized that they can also carry these scams out through text messages as well. So we've always got our phones with us. We're constantly looking at incoming messages. How easy is it to be caught off guard and see a new text message that we click on without really stopping to think about it? phishing emails are getting increasingly sophisticated and tough to detect, but there are some steps we can take to identify those scams. We've all been focused on good hygiene and washing our hands to decrease our risk to the coronavirus, but what if we applied that same hygiene to our email? What if we trained employees to slow down, take that 20 seconds to examine an email and look for those telltale signs? We know there are things we can look for to help weed out the scams from the legitimate emails. Here's a list of some of the key things to look for. See if the message includes super generic content or that broad impersonal greeting. Always look closely at the email address. A lot of times it'll be off just by a single letter or number, but that's all it takes to tip off that it's a scam. Think if the message is trying to create that false sense of urgency, or maybe it's got a strong demands for actions. Definitely look closely at any link before clicking. Put on that copy editor hat maybe and look for misspelled words, incorrect grammar, or weird messaging. That can be a really good indicator. Always make sure that a site is secure before entering any sensitive data. And then finally, think twice, maybe even 3 times before clicking on any attachments. Most computer viruses are spread through email attachments. So although it may look important, it can have malware that can cause a lot of damage. I think so often we can be in a rush and distracted when checking email, but if we take just that 20 seconds to stop and look for these key things, it can save a lot of trouble and potential disaster, down the road. I know Verity has lots of examples and resources like this that you can use to help educate your employees on what to look out for. And it's these kinds of resources, as well as ongoing security awareness training, that can really help you change your employees' behavior, establish those good habits, and create that culture of security within your organization. We've focused a lot on the fact that our employees, while often one of our greatest assets, can also be the weakest link in our security. And I'm not talking about that rogue or malicious employee. I'm talking about that well-meaning employee who clicks the bad link or opens the bad attachment or uses the same password over and over and over. We really need to empower those employees to become that strongest link in security by training them to be vigilant and cautious. Because this doesn't all have to be doom and gloom, right? There are some serious threats out there that can cause serious damage to your business or organization. But if we are aware of those threats and if we take some steps to increase security, we really can minimize those risks and help protect your business and your employees. Here are some tips to start moving in that direction. Some of these we've already touched on, but wanted to circle back on compliance. As we said, compliance is no longer optional, and businesses are required to take steps to protect data and privacy, but compliance regulations can be overwhelming and time-consuming and frustrating. You can lessen some of that stress and worry by automating compliance through a web portal system that helps track and organize everything. And we've talked quite a bit about the ramifications of exposed passwords, so it's incredibly important to help employees protect those passwords, both on the network and off, perhaps through something like a password manager. You can also add that extra layer of security through two-factor authentication. Part of that zero trust framework we discussed is ensuring that the right users have access, and 2FA can help with that. There are some really great solutions to provide a nice balance between convenience and security. Monitor the dark web. We talked quite a bit about how exposed credentials can lead to catastrophe. Ongoing credential monitoring can provide those critical early alerts that can help prevent a potential costly and widespread data breach. And then finally, bring in a team that you trust to help put together the security strategies that will work best for your company. Really lean on them to provide the guidance and advice that will help you stay on top of the changing threat landscape. I encourage you certainly to first understand the risks that we've discussed today, understand that there are measures that you can take to minimize vulnerabilities, and then bring in a team that can figure out where you are today with security and put in a plan in place to get you where you need to be. I know that Jonathan and his team are ready to do just that, so I'll turn it back to him to wrap up and discuss an important first step you can take in protecting your organization.
Thank you very much, Kim, for being our host and diving into all this information. And thanks to everyone else for joining us today. By now, I think everyone has picked up on the fact that we're very serious about our clients taking the proper security measures to protect your businesses. As I mentioned earlier, that's one of the main reasons why we include dark web monitoring and security awareness training in all of our managed service plans. We are offering a free one-time dark web scan for everyone who joined us on this webinar. So we will be reaching out to each and every one of you. With our ongoing dark web monitoring service, we continuously scan the dark web. Rest assured that when a new exposure is found, we will notify you to take the necessary precautions and to safeguard against further vulnerabilities and exposures. All right, we have a few minutes left to answer some questions that came in during the webinar. Kim, I'll direct a couple of the dark web questions to you. First question, how do I get my credentials off of the dark web once they've been exposed?
Oh gosh, what a great question, and probably not going to like the answer here. Unfortunately, once your credentials are on the dark web, there's no way to remove them, and anyone who makes that promise to you is not being truthful. And I think that's one of the reasons why exposures are so troublesome. Once your information is out there, you can't get it back. But this is why it's important to team up with a knowledgeable team like Verity, because they can provide the guidance to mitigate the risks posed by those exposed credentials. And I also think it's why ongoing dark web monitoring is so important. We often see that scammers will piggyback on exposures with additional and much more targeted scams that can lead to even more problems. So that ongoing credential monitoring can provide that critical early alert that we talked about when additional exposures hit the dark web so that you can take swift action.
Thanks, Kim. This next one is a good one too. How often do you check for stolen emails and passwords on the dark web?
Great question indeed. Dark web monitoring that Verity can provide includes 24/7, 365 monitoring of the dark web. So it's not regularly scheduled scans, it is ongoing, so that as soon as any email address with your company's domain is found on the dark web, it's immediately reported so that you can be notified and take the necessary precautions to prevent that costly and widespread data breach. So that external monitoring provides some peace of mind, I think, ensuring that we can detect and mitigate those cyber threats posed by stolen email addresses and passwords in real time.
Excellent, thanks again. We have time for one more question. Let's see here. How do I get my free dark web scan? I think I can answer that one. So we will be sending everyone on this webinar a link to schedule your scan. After you've filled out that form on our website, we will contact you to run the scan on your domain and send you the report. It's as simple as that. I know there were a few more questions that rolled in, but unfortunately, it's all the time we have for today. If your question didn't get answered, we will be sure to email you directly with an answer. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to talking with all of you soon.